Okay, I think we are underway and now recording. So welcome everybody to the first of a two-part webinar series between Neosurf and Betting Hero. The title of this webinar is Unfiltered: How Players Bet, Budget, and View Payments and Responsible Gaming. You're joined here by two of the smartest people that I know in the industry. And if you don't know me, we'll get into our introductions here shortly. So you're in for a treat. I will share before we begin that this is designed to be an interactive webinar series. If you know anything about myself, Ernie, Sue, or the Betting Hero and Neosurf teams in general, you'll know that we like to have fun and we want to make this as fun as possible and as engaging as possible. We also realize that everybody who's in the audience today is probably headed to ICE next week. So nobody needs another boring session to sit through. So we're going to try and make this one as engaging as possible. We're going to be looking at some really interesting insights that have been brought to the surface by the Betting Hero and Neosurf teams working together. So without further ado, looks like we have a good amount of attendees in the room. We will kick it off and we'll go through some introductions.
That's
Oh,
me.
sorry, there we go. You'll have to forgive me, guys. This is my first time webinar moderating in this format. So you'll see the faces here on the screen. We're joined by Sue Page, CEO of Americas at Neosurf, myself, co-founder, president of Betting Hero, and Ernie Roper, senior director of product and research at Betting Hero, one of my good colleagues. I'm going to get out of the way here for the most part today. That'll be a surprise to most of you in the audience that know me, but I'm going to do my best. Sue, I'm going to kick it over to you. If you wouldn't mind giving us an introduction to yourself and to Neosurf for anybody that's not familiar with the company. And then I'll take over and do a little bit of a background on Betting Hero. And then Ernie, I'll kick it to you for your own introduction, and then we'll dive into the study itself.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much and welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We're very excited to finally be able to share this research with you. So for those of you that don't know, Neosurf is a payments company. We're an alternate payment method. We have been around for over 20 years. In fact, last year was our 20th anniversary. We predominantly are in Europe, UK and France, really cash into operators and into a wallet. And one of the key reasons that we wanted to kick off this research with Betting Hero was looking at our entry into the US and learning more about these players and what it is that we can do differently. So that was the spirit of the discussion and how I came to meet and engage with the Betting Hero guys.
Yeah, and it's been a long time coming too. So if you remember, I mean, you and Ernie obviously, I believe met first, but I think a couple of years ago in an EGR Power Summit in California, we'd had some conversations around how we might be able to help one another, and I'll use that as a segue to give everybody a brief introduction to Betting Hero. If you're not familiar with the company, I co-founded with Jeremy Jackery back in 2018. We started as an offline affiliate, running in-person activation events inside casinos, sportsbooks, arenas, tailgates, sports bars, you name it. Obviously, through doing that, we had a very unique opportunity to connect with customers in person, understand their likes, their dislikes, their product challenges, obviously help to troubleshoot those product challenges that they might be having as well. Payments is obviously one of the major hurdles that customers have to overcome when looking to register, fund, and bet with any digital gaming product. And it made sense for us to expand our own reaches into a research and testing capacity, working with operators and suppliers, just like Neosurf, to both conduct consumer research studies where we gather insights that you'll see today, but also to do in-depth product testing and promotional analysis. So that's Betting Hero. We've obviously had an amazing experience working with Neosurf and really excited to share the insights that we were able to uncover during this study. But without further ado, Ernie, I'll pass it over to you if you want to give your introduction, and then we will talk a little bit about the study itself.
Yep. Yeah. Ernie Ropus, Senior Director of Product and Research, like Jay mentioned. So I've been with Betting Hero over 4 years now, previously at Gartner. betting here, we're having the most customer interactions face to face in the space, right? So my job is leveraging those interactions to gather insights, for operators, for payment providers, et cetera. And we really do three things. We do all in-market testing. We run VOC surveys like this, and then, like Jay mentioned, a few competitive tracking products like promotional tracking. So really excited to go through this data, here with Sue.
Perfect. So let's dive into this study specifically. But first, Sue, could you perhaps just give a little bit more context around why you engaged Betting Hero to conduct this study in the first place? What is it that Neosurf's looking to accomplish? And then Ernie, I'll pass the mic over to you, and if you could actually describe the study, what is it that we went out and did on behalf of Neosurf?
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said, as a payments company, but with history in the UK and Europe, it was really important to us to really step back and take a look at this market. And we wanted to get a much greater understanding of the player, what motivates them, their habits and behaviors. And I think, being a transplant, having lived in the US for nearly 20 years, I've worked over the course of my career with many different companies in different categories that are making an entry from the UK into the US. And what I've noticed is that behavior around a lot of these organizations, I don't want to necessarily say it's arrogance, but maybe there's also a naivety there where there's an assumption that we speak the same language, therefore it must be the same. So if you remove, obviously we have fundamental differences within the sports betting categories, but if we actually look at demographics, I think sometimes there can be a real naivety around how we communicate to players, how we talk to them, what their fears are, their hopes and dreams, right? Their trust issues. And for us, we're a small company, but that's really important to us. We really want to focus on what they want, the language that they use, and also really, like I said, what motivates them. So, obviously we talk a lot about payments, but RG is responsible gaming is a really important strategy to us as an organization as a whole. And what we wanted to know was, is that important to the players, right? We talk a lot about RG, we talk a lot about payments, but I didn't feel that we actually spoke to the players about how they felt about things, whether certain terminology resonated with them, and really what if their thoughts around those elements impacted how they play. And that was really the goal of this. Is what I loved about Betting Hero was the fact it was feet on the ground, and that we were actually going to go and talk to real people and have that experience communicated to us firsthand.
Yeah, that's great. And look, anecdotally, that connection with the real customer, with the real pain, the real opportunities, it's invaluable. For those in the audience that conduct UX research on your own or consumer insight studies on your own, you'll know that the insights you get from those customers is so valuable, probably more so than any professional researcher might be able to provide 10 times over. At least that's what we've found. So Ernie, talk to us a little bit about the study itself. How did we conduct the study? Was it online? Were these remote interviews? Was it a combination of things? Talk to us a little bit about the quantitative side and the qualitative side.
Yeah, yeah. And just to read it, like Sue mentioned, the goal was to understand, from the players, what was their behaviors, what was their experience like around deposits, withdrawals, what motivated them, why were they withdrawing, multiple times a week, et cetera. And to get to these answers, we wanted to do a two-part, study here. So part one was the quantitative research. So we picked three markets for a reason, right? So we picked New Jersey, being it's the longest standing state that's been legalized, has sports and casino. So understand how casino players behave versus sports players, etc. North Carolina was chosen because that was the most recent state to come online. So how does a new state, how do new players behave? Do they behave differently than New Jersey? And then we picked Colorado because there's the most competitors there, right? So the most operators. So really trying to understand if there's any big call outs or differences between these very three different markets. So we ran the quantitative survey, and like Sue mentioned, this was a combination of online, so through our database of players that we've interacted before, as well as in person through a Betting Hero Bar Network event. And then part two was after we reviewed those findings, we wanted to dive deeper on some of those key callouts, which we'll go through. And we did in-person qualitative interviews in New Jersey. It was myself and Sue. We chose high volume, high frequency players, some VIPs, to really hit home those key points. So it was a two-part study to really get all those answers there.
Great. So really, we're diving pretty deep on customer preferences, their likes, how they interact, and obviously with the payments slant. So if we can move over to the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about the live interviews themselves. So tell us about these customers. Who are they? How frequent are they playing? For those in the audience that might be thinking, okay, well, anybody can go down the street and find a few people that have played sports bets in the past. How reliable is the information that they're sharing? How reliable is the feedback that they're giving us? How much do we want to trust their opinion when we're making product decisions that might impact, millions of dollars and potentially market share as well? Tell us a little bit about these customers. What were they doing?
Yeah, so the customers we had come in, these are very experienced customers. On average, they bet at least once a week over the past year, right? They're on average too. They were using two or more apps per week, so they were very engaged, very familiar with the landscape. We chose those for a reason to understand, if they're running into issues or if they have problems. We're assuming the less experienced players will do as well. So we had 20 people come in who all bet more than once per week. And then you could see here just some of the key callouts. 65% at some point in the past year experienced payment issues, and only 34% said they have not experienced any issues in the past year. So that, this is something that I think going in we thought would have been lower, but it was interesting to see how many of even these experienced bettors ran into some sort of issue in the past year.
And is it safe to assume that these are players that have been depositing? They've had successful deposits as well as unsuccessful. Is that right? So they're trying methods that potentially that have worked in the past.
Correct. Yeah. So they've, whether it's on the withdrawal or payment ed, yeah, they've ran into some issues in the past there, and they are experienced. So.
Okay. Yeah, and that's pretty consistent with what we see, right? Anecdotally, when we're in the field, we're talking to tens of thousands of customers every single month, and we do interact with customers that a payment method might work one day and then not work another day, and they have very little information as to why that is, and even across multiple operators. Sue, is that consistent with what you've seen, let's say in the UK and in Europe? And how do you think that issue may proliferate throughout the United States if it is going to?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think it is that different. Because customers are used to paying online, and with sports betting, there seems to be more barriers for them. As somebody, especially from an entry level, just coming in and they've never used a sports betting app before, and maybe I'm being declined, and my card's being declined, or I don't actually understand why. And we can get into that a bit later in terms of, I think, how we communicate to these players is really important. But I wasn't necessarily surprised that the players are still having issues. I think what's important is that we need to start to dig into where are these issues, and is it actually all on the operator? Because let's face it, the players are blaming the operator, right? They have a bad experience. They're on FanDuel and they have a bad experience with payments. They're blaming FanDuel. They're not blaming Bank of America, or they're not blaming Neosurf, or whoever it might be. But we need to kind of drill down into that next level. It's like, well, was it actually user error? Did they enter their card incorrectly? How do we improve that experience from an onboarding perspective? And that's one of the things where I'm looking at this research and pulling that into how we develop and improve our product for the US, is working with an onboarding specialist. Excuse me. So we're working with an onboarding organization that takes that pain out of things. So we're removing some of the steps from the players and making it a much more streamlined onboarding process. So we start to mitigate some of these sort of like, more player driven nags.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're absolutely right. I mean, customers do blame the operators. Players do blame the operators. The error messaging that goes along with a failed deposit method or attempt is not always great. It can be great. It can be very descriptive, but that then requires the player to actually read the error messaging and heed the advice of whatever it shares and maybe try a different method or do something differently, like update an address potentially. But you're right, they do blame the operators. We hear it. I've heard it myself hundreds, thousands of times. Oh, this account works on everything else that I do, or it works on my fantasy account. Why does it not work on sports betting or iCasino? There are a lot of misconceptions too from the players' side, which is a big cause for education, but not necessarily the topic of today's conversation. I think that is a fantastic point, though. When we think about those players that are successful, one of the other big frustrations that we hear about is to do with timing, is speed. Certainly when it comes to the withdrawals, we all know that operators are quite good at getting money into the accounts. In the eyes of the customer, are they as good at getting money out? Which obviously for the customer is more important, right? They're going to win, at least they think they are every single time, and they want to be able to get their money out very, very quickly. And when they do win, it becomes even more important for them to be able to access the funds. So, what we've observed is that payments aren't necessarily improving from the eyes of the customer, the eyes of the player, even though we in the industry have seen a lot of improvement. I can think of just an additional array of payment options that are around today. For example, Venmo, Apple Pay, that were not around in 2018. So we've already seen marked improvement in terms of the options available. But there are still issues that customers are citing, or problems that we can resolve by better communicating to those players. So we're going to talk a little bit about that here. I do want to pause for a second and remind the attendees, however, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We will get to those. And also keep an eye out. There will be some interactive polls here that you'll have an opportunity to participate in as well. So make sure that we're not too far down that list of open tabs you have on your browser right now. So Sue, talk to us.
Before you ask me a question, I just want to jump in there and pick up on something you've just said, because where you're saying, like, where we look at it from an industry perspective, we're improving because we're providing more variety and different methods. But I think that the crux here is, do those methods work? And how is the consumer interacting with them, and are they actually experiencing the same problem? So I think certainly what I took from this, and from being in the room with Ernie and the New Jersey guys, was that they like the variety, but they're still having the same issues.
Yep.
And Ernie and I kind of like got into this a little bit last week. It's like, well, deposits aren't so much of a problem. It's like 26%. I'm like, I have a background in retail. And if 26% of my customers were walking out the door because they couldn't pay, that's a huge issue to me.
Huge problem. I say this all the time. And we talk about it a little bit more in the sense of, if a customer is going through an acquisition funnel, if they're trying to register and fund and bet with one of these sports betting accounts, and we as an industry are comfortable with 50% of those customers not being successful, that's not okay. In any other industry, we would not be okay with that. Think about the other digital products we use day to day, whether it be Uber and Lyft or Amazon or DoorDash. If the products only work 50% of the time when you try to register and actually use the accounts, they probably wouldn't be around anymore. Now, obviously, we understand there's huge regulation. There's a lot of complexity in these products in the sports betting and iCasino space. However, you're right, 26% of players walking out of the door without successfully purchasing, big issue, and big enough for us to spend a lot of time and probably money trying to solve. So great, thank you for bringing that up. So let's go back to you then, Sue. 26% of customers stated that deposits were slow. They waited too long for their funds to clear. Talk to us about that. What does that really mean? What are customers saying when they say things are slow? Is this a relative expression that really we should, as customers, as players, be getting over, or is this something that there's room for improvement?
I think we know that there's room for improvement, but also this goes back to customer perception. And Ernie, there was a quote somewhere in the research. It's like, well, if I get a refund from Amazon, I get it immediately, right? So it's like, I want my money out. And the fact that I'm made to wait, and I don't necessarily think it's even just the wait time, is that it's difficult for the player, right? There are different rules across, like they're using multiple apps, like we know, so there's different rules. Their first experience with a withdrawal is potentially the clunkiest, but what triggers a review, right? How easy am I getting my money out? And what are the steps that I have to go through and the hoops that I have to jump through to get the money out? And this, so from a Neosurf perspective, this is one of the areas that we think we can really start to improve that experience. We have what we call a KYC handshake. So we're able to share KYC information with the operators and vice versa through our API. So instead of having to re-verify that player because I've already been on the app and I've done, I've played, I've wagered, I've won, and now I want my money out. Why do I have to re-verify? Right, it's a real barrier for the players. So for us to be able to do that in the background, and for the operator to pass us and say, "Yeah, this is Sue Page. We know who she is. We've KYC'd her," and pass that to us in the background, it just creates a much smoother and more transparent experience for the player.
Yeah.
So it's really it's more than just speed and timing. It's also the UX as well. How does the process feel? And Ernie, maybe talk to us a little bit about that. You speak to players literally every single day, and most of the times you're testing products or you're finding issues, finding bugs. How
Yeah.
often does this become a topic of conversation for you and the players you're speaking to?
Yeah, just to and elaborate on these points, and you're right, Jay. So like this first one, I was shocked, right? So we surveyed 300 respondents across those states. 26% said deposits were slow and they waited for funds to clear, right? Which, if you're and made any deposits, it does work pretty quick when it works, right? So this really was a question we wanted to dive deeper on in the in-person sessions, and when we did, I was expecting the really active users to be like, no, they're pretty quick. They all had some sort of story, right? So like, I'll tell you two of them. Like one of them in one of the interviews was a user, right? She's been, using it since 2018. She's an online casino player. She wanted to try Venmo as a payment method because she got $100 in there, right, for whatever her birthday. And she tried linking her Venmo, and she said it took her 20 minutes, couldn't figure it out. She was trying so hard to like get it to link, and it wouldn't work on one app, but then worked on another, right? So then she was able, for whatever reason, the Venmo account linking, we see this all the time when we're testing, it wasn't routing correctly, and she said it took her 20 minutes. And like, so she's citing that UX, that experience took way too long. Another user as well, they cited that, Apple Pay became a method. They tried using Apple Pay. It wasn't working. And they showed us, I mean, it was accounted to a credit card that wasn't accepted, right? So the user, like Sue, I think you hinted to it was like there wasn't correct user messaging, and this user just said, doesn't make sense. I use Apple Pay all the time, and she was kind of insulted that she was getting denied. So those were some of the stories we heard there. And then the other two are just, I think, big points to hit on is just we heard it a lot in the sessions, a lot in the survey, just how important the speed of withdrawal is. Because again, when it does work, your money goes out instantly. They want their money back right away as well. So everyone we spoke to, well, I like FanDuel because I get my withdrawals the quickest, or I like DraftKings, they pay me out instantly. I get it, it's right in my bank in a minute, right? So they really noted this. They really cited those scenarios. But if it wasn't quick, they also were sure to let you know. And you can see a lot of them, and a lot of it is like, just it could be just an arbitrary reason, right? So like Sue mentioned, it could be their first withdrawal on an app. They won a bunch of money. It's a $750 withdrawal, and they're trying to pull it out, and it's under review. And the customer doesn't know that, but they've been using another app prior, and they've been getting their money on time. So then their perception of this new operator is they're slow. I'm never going to use them again, even though that's only because it's the first withdrawal, it's a high amount or whatever it is. But customers, they aren't aware. So I think any messaging around that would also help. They think that's just the norm.
Yeah. And then when you think about payments I think a lot of people in the industry think about payments as a necessary part of the customer experience, part of the journey, obviously, but don't necessarily think about it as a retention tool. How can you use payments to actually retain players? And we all know, right? We've shifted definitely in the last 24 months from a acquisition heavy industry into and really land grab opportunity into a retention type focus as a whole. And that's obviously an average, but that is what we are feeling. Can payments be used to retain customers? Should they be thought about differently? And should it be a competitive advantage? I mean, it looks like here to me that they could be a pretty good tool, right? If 69% of folks that have had issues would say that they would likely move to a competitor or to a different product if they offered faster withdrawals, is that something that maybe should be invested in by operators as a competitive advantage.
So from our perspective, obviously, yes.
That's
But
convenient.
well, thank you so much, Jay. The question is, are the operators investing? And I think for us, for Neosurf, we're very niche, right? This is all we do. We're a payments company that operates in sports betting and iGaming and in gaming and video games. So this is a very niche piece for us. We're a small company, which means we can be more fleet of foot. And one of the reasons for this research was, like I say, to build out our product to suit this US market. So if I'm, if I can connect, if I can communicate, it's difficult because we're trying to reverse engineer something, right? The payments companies, are what they are, and we have all of these layers of regulation for sports betting, and we're trying to shoehorn something in. And we still have a lot of the banks are still proceeding with caution, right? So how do we communicate all that to the player? The player doesn't care. The player just wants to place. They just want to spend their money. They want to make a transaction. So as a payments company, I think specifically focus in this space, we have an opportunity to be able to improve that communication, walk the player through. And we're receiving an awful lot of this data, right? So we can see what's happening, and we can see what's happening if they're using Neosurf across multiple operators. We can see where those problems are, and we can start to create a really strong piece of data science that we can start to share with our operators that will help improve that process.
Yeah, great. Perfect. Well, let's move this along. We've spoken a little bit about withdrawals as part of the payments ecosystem. Let's talk a little bit about the funding methods themselves. Ernie, talk us through this, the question asked and really what we're looking to uncover here and why this has been included in the study for the audience.
Yeah, I mean, this was an interesting one as well, so we wanted to call it out. You see that small bar there. So 22% said they'd like to see an increased variety of payment methods. So not a huge amount. There are a lot. Some apps have north of 13, 14, 15, right? They have a lot of methods, but one that was
Ernie, sorry, can we double click on that? I've noticed the same thing. When you're in these products, it does now feel almost overwhelming, especially for somebody that's not from within the industry or familiar with all of these payments providers. I could imagine a new player, Sue, you referenced it earlier, especially might be really overwhelmed when looking at one of these wallets. Is it a factor of there's just too many options now and that maybe we need to streamline that, or is more options better? What are players telling us when we're talking to them about payments options?
So from my perspective, more options are better, right? That's certainly what we've heard. And I think throughout this, I mean, 22% would said they like more. There wasn't anyone that responded and said they didn't want to see any more. I think that again, it comes back down to communication, right? I see a cashier page and there's a lot of noise on there, and I see a lot of logos, and maybe I'm not being told exactly what they are. So that maybe there's a room for improvement there. This piece for me, obviously, was an important question because we are predominantly, using cash to pay and play online. That's always been our model outside of the US. For the US, the model is cash into the wallet to the operator, but we've always believed that the cash player is underserved in the US, and we know that cash isn't dead. We're not saying it's a growing piece of the market, but there is still somewhere around about 5% of consumers and players that use cash and will always use cash for whatever reason. And it's not that they will use that 100% of the time, but it's an option for them. And one of the things that I took out of the in-person stuff with Ernie was that the players, it's a very social event, right? So players are getting together and they're betting together, and a lot of them will do that via Venmo and other apps, but a lot of them also want to do that via cash. So the idea that it is still an important option, and I think that comes into play more when we start talking about being able to withdraw cash. So I'm going into my CVS and say, actually, what, I won last week. I'm just going to pull my cash out while I'm here. And that's where we have that really convenience and ease of use.
Yeah. Look, for anybody that really knows our business, Betting Hero, they'll know that we do a lot of in-person activation events in retail properties, whether it be casinos or bars. Cash, without question, is the preference for most customers in a retail setting. When you're interacting with a customer that's in a social environment, whether it be a casino, sportsbook, or some sort of venue, cash is always the go-to, right? Can I deposit with cash? Can I withdraw with cash? Because it's immediate and it's also tangible, which is quite interesting when you think about the rest of the industries that we don't use cash in anymore. The casino industry obviously has been cash forever, so it makes sense that there's still a keen interest there. So completely agree. Perfect. I think we have a poll coming up, if I'm not mistaken. So if we could perhaps move over there. So this should be interactive. I'm going to be honest and tell the audience that I have no idea how you interact. Oh, here we go. There is a nice pop-up now. So everybody can vote. So I'll ask the question again, just in case you don't have the screen pulled up. What percentage of respondents said promotions were the main factor influencing their deposit? So we're switching gears here a little bit. I think it's pretty interesting to think about how promotions and payments and deposits interact, how useful and effective are promotions at driving deposits, and how important are they in a decision-making process. So if everybody could fill that out, and once we have the responses, I'm sure they'll pop up on a screen here magically that we can then review. So Alex, let me know if you need me to do anything else.
I see the screen, but apparently we can't vote.
Yeah, I can't vote. Okay, so I think we've got some results. I'm not sure if the audience can see the results, so I'll read through those. Okay, so less than 20%, 44% responded, and think that less than 20% of respondents said that promotions were the main factor influencing their deposits. 13% think that between 20 and 35% of respondents believe that, and more than 35%, 44% believe. So let's go into that. As you can see here on the screen, financial restraints, commitments dictate deposits, not promotions. So those of you that responded less than 20%, well done. You got that right. I did too, but I knew what slide was coming up, so I was cheating. But
I'd like to ask them what they thought, though, because I'm surprised that so many of them actually answered correctly, because we were very surprised by this. But what did they think?
I was incredibly surprised. I was incredibly surprised when I saw this. So yeah, if anybody does want to pop into the chat and give some additional context as to why they thought it might be lower, maybe it's just that they've been hearing people bang on about promotions not being effective for a while. But let's talk about that while those responses do come in. Ernie, we do a lot of promotions tracking, so I know this is somewhere that you've got a lot of intel as well.
Yeah, Jay, I was going to jump in here. I mean, but still, 44% said it was higher than 35, and I think that's what most people think, right? It's promotions. They get a deposit match. There's a big bet and get or a profit boost that night. That's why they're depositing. But when you talk to these players in the survey, it's promotions. It's not the main reason that they're deciding to deposit or not. And we were speaking with VIPs, so these were we were able to speak with them, be face to face, and we really got to see who the VIP player is, and it is the normal person, right? It's the teacher, it was the city worker. So we met them, and they were saying, hey, it depends on, I have a big 16th birthday for my son this month, so I'm not going to be able to deposit as much, and I'm holding back. Or yeah, I recently lost a lot, so I'm holding back this month, but next month when I get paid. I think the common perception, or what Sue and I thought going in, was these have a lot of disposable income, and they're betting when there's a game they really like, or there's a big promotion or opportunity. But these VIP players, they were the average Joe, as you say, right? I don't know, Sue, if you had any other more color there.
Yeah, I mean, I was really surprised, and yeah, again, maybe I was a bit naive going into it, but what really struck me when we came out of these in-person sessions was, as payments and onboarding, right? We talk a lot about KYC and know your customer, and I walked out there thinking, We have no we have no idea who these people are. It really struck me because I think we have this perception of who these VIP players, some Wall Street dude in a suit and a Rolex, and people that have expendable income, where actually they're the average consumer, and they're teachers and caterers, and they're betting as a form of entertainment, right? It's something that they want to do, and I think they budget that in the same way as, like, can we afford to go out for dinner this week? Or, sports betting becomes part of that sort of like entertainment piece for these individuals.
I mean, that's going to be music to the ears of any regulator, I'm sure, but certainly anybody in the RG space. I think it's surprising. RG, and we'll get into RG, but this represents, in my opinion, a lot of self-control and almost self-policing to a degree from players, which I didn't expect, because I'm not sure how much of the RG information and or tools are getting used. We'll go into that exactly. The promotions, however, I would like to kind of dive in on, because one of the issues that I think we've seen from players is not that promotions aren't effective in terms of encouraging engagement or enhancing experience or potentially giving somebody the opportunity to see more of an ROI. But it's perhaps the lack of understanding of the promotions. They're difficult to understand, they're complex, they're complicated, and they're hard to find, especially if you play across 2 or 3 or 4 apps like some of these players do. They don't roll up very well, not as much in this space by design. So, Ernie, I mean, is there an opportunity here for promotions to play more of a part? Do we want it to? Or is it good that we have this behavior already happening within certainly the VIP space, where players are thinking about budget and thinking about where these entertainment dollars are coming from?
Yeah, I think there's a big opportunity there. Look, I mean, this is on deposit behavior, but then when you ask, loyalty to apps, why they're continuing to use certain operators, promotions play a big role in retention. And you're right, there is a lot of confusion, right? And this is part of where they blame the operators on withdrawals, as well as, like, for example, in the casino space, there may be a certain amount of playthrough, only certain games are available for the promotion. So they'll make a deposit attached to a promotion, and they're playing whatever, their favorite game, let's just say it's Rocket, and they're playing that, but the promotion wasn't available for that game. And then they may have won some money, but they're unable to withdraw because that's tied to whatever, a certain number of slot games. So there was a frustration around that, and I think there is a big opportunity, and just making promotions that are relevant to them, right? So if they are a sports bettor and they bet on NFL, getting profit boost around that sport or involved in that sport. So there was I think there's definitely a big opportunity, and it's still the top reasons on when they log in, what they're looking at, before they play. So
Great, great. Perfect. Again, audience, feel free to jump in. I know we've got a couple of questions sitting in the Q&A line, so I might jump into this first one, Sue, and I'm going to kick this over to you. How is your company dealing with the diverse regulatory and compliance schemes requirements associated with your products? So regulatory and compliance question for you.
Well, so as a payments company, right? So I'm a deposit method into the operator. So from a sports betting standpoint, right? And when obviously we have to be approved by a local DGE and Adobe licensing. We have a sponsor bank that we work with. And I then complete there's a huge amount of compliance and due diligence that we have to go through with our banking partner to ensure that we are regulated. And but like I say, from a sports betting standpoint, it's really just being that vendor approval from the DGEs or the state regulators.
Perfect. Excellent. Well, let's move this forward. We've got a lot more to get through, and I'm conscious of time. So, and we can skip over that quote, but we'll have this deck available to any of the attendees as well afterwards. So over 55% of players or those that responded are depositing and withdrawing multiple times a month. When I first saw this, I had an idea that it might be a high number, but I wasn't quite sure exactly how high and how frequent. these are VIP players. Is this because they're VIP players that they're depositing and withdrawing so much? Why deposit and withdraw frequently? Is this a trust issue? Where does this come from? Ernie, I'll kick it to you first.
Yeah, I mean this is a big one, right? And if anyone knows about, the costs associated with, multiple deposits a week, this is quite expensive for operators, right? So what we heard, and it was really interesting to see it. So if you look at that first bar, 40% of respondents are saying they deposit every week, 28% are saying they withdraw weekly. When we, took a look at their behavior, asked them some questions, customers would deposit on a Friday. Maybe they deposit $100. They win a few bets, lose a few. They're down to 80. They withdraw on Saturday. They deposit that 80 back in on Sunday. They bet on the games. They may have won some money. Now they have 160. They withdraw that on Monday. Thursday night they play on the casino. They deposit back. So the same funds were going in and out. And it was even for high volume VIP players. It was interesting to hear. And when you talk to these players, especially casino players, in their head, it's almost like, when you go to the casino, you take your cash, you get chips, and you take your chips, you go home. In their head, it's almost the same. They do it as a session, right? Hey, I'm playing on Thursday night. It's hard for them, and a lot of them, when you ask, they can't keep track, right? So they want to be able to keep track of what they're depositing and withdrawing. So by pulling it out, they feel like they have some control. They know what's going in and out. And then when they do want to go play again, they deposit back in. So it was just interesting to hear how much the same dollars are going in and out. And then if you look here, you could see just how frequently customers are withdrawing.
Yeah. And this is one of those areas, right, where an operator wants to give the customer the experience that they're looking for. They want to be able to cater to their wants, which clearly they want to be able to do this, or so it seems. But it's also extremely expensive. I know that it's difficult to quantify, and every payment method is different. But we've heard that it can cost up to 10% of a total transaction to be able to move money in and out. So if somebody's playing with $100, it can cost up to $10 to the operator for that customer to be able to get that money in and out. Sue, what opportunity is here for operators to be able to save on those expenses that might seem unnecessary, but also give the customer the best possible experience?
I think just going back to Annie's point, that's the analogy about being in the casino and getting my chips out. I think that's not unusual behavior, whether that's VIP or what we would call the housewives bet. When we see very similar behavior in the UK with one of our entry level products with the cash voucher into bingo, right? As soon as somebody they want the money out, they want it immediately, and they put it straight back in again. There's that element of it's my money, I've won it, and I want it in my hand immediately. So that's tough for the operators to change that habit and behavior. It's not being viewed as the player as a regular retail transaction, right? My money's there and now I want it back. I think from our perspective, is what can we do? What can Neosurf provide as support to the operators, and how can we help mitigate and alleviate some of those costs? And the answer is that, having that wallet solution that provides a single point of control. So, withdrawing back to the wallet and then back in from the wallet is certainly going to alleviate some of that cost structure.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a conversation that I've had with operators directly at the executive level several times in the last few months. Is a big topic of conversation at that level, especially as we move into this retention focus of players. And if you can retain, and we've already understood that payments and withdrawals, there is an opportunity to retain customers using these tools as differentiators. And this is one of those areas exactly from an operator, certainly to also financially make a good decision, but while retaining customers. Great.
This also goes back to the previous slide, though, is that it's my budgeting, right? So I want my money out because I'm budgeting, or maybe it's like I've been successful and I've wagered and I've won, and now I'm going to spend those funds elsewhere, right? And maybe that's a birthday gift or a dinner out, or whatever it is. But it's I think these two slides are really important to understanding what's driving the players.
Yeah, and I think the next one too. So we're gonna move things on onto a poll quickly. Again, attendees, feel free to dive in here and provide your answers when the pop-up shows. Just have to bear with us a second. If you could move the screen on as well, Alex, that would be great. So how many players are in favor of having their ID shared across operators if it made onboarding easier? So we're talking about obviously the ability for operators to be able to share intelligence here back and forth from a player standpoint. So if everybody could move that on. Again, I cannot vote, so I'm going to close it. And once these answers pop up, we'll go through them.
Yeah, and the spirit behind this question was really to from our perspective, we have a lot of backroom tools and reporting, that we can provide to the operators. So a lot of information sort of from our data science team. But what I really wanted to understand is like what's important to the consumer, to the players, and do they actually, is that actually a tangible piece for them? And so like I said, that's where the spirit from this question came from.
Yeah, it makes sense. And if we look at the responses that are coming in now, how many players are in favor of having their ID shared across operators? 47% of people think less than 35%, which is pretty interesting. So let's move on to the actual insights, and we'll see how well everybody did. Perfect. So registration and setup for new payment methods. You can see here 85% of them classify the ease of use as important. 51% of respondents in favor of payment solutions that share verified KYC data with operators to streamline those transactions, and 44% interested in being able to track their spend across all apps. I think this is pretty interesting. It's much higher than maybe we as an industry would expect, and I understand why the attendees here would perhaps answer differently. Because who wants their data shared more times than it already is? We know how at risk and valuable that data is. But clearly here, from an experience standpoint, this is what customers want. Customers want the most seamless process or journeys that they can achieve. And that doesn't necessarily mean with one operator. They think about their sports betting and iCasino experiences collectively. Is that fair, Sue?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things about the in-person interviews that struck me is that there was one lady in particular, when we talked about her data, and she was very concerned about identity theft. But yet, in the same sentence, she said that she would be fine if having her information shared across platforms if it made things easier and simpler. So the bottom line is that the players want things to be simple. They don't want, going back to this recurrent theme, right? So they don't want these barriers to entry. Ernie said something to me last week. He said, like, what is it? You said you guys were having data breaches when you were at high school. It's kind of a
yeah, I
phantom
mean,
line.
the younger generation, like, so we've done some testing and research on, operators. I don't know if you've seen, like, in the registration process, you type the last 4 digits of your social, all your information pops up. The younger generation doesn't blink an eye, right? Oh, great, this is easy. I don't need to type my address in. The older generation, gets a little spooked. So yeah, it's interesting to see, the younger they tend to be, the more they want that just ease of use and save them time, right?
Yeah.
And I think it comes down to control. And if we move to the next slide, I mean, we've got some really interesting insights here exactly on that point, right? Players want to have control. They want to feel like they have control if they don't actually have the control itself. So you can see here, 57% of the respondents love the idea of being able to manage their spend across all sports betting accounts. Again, how convenient for somebody that is betting across more than one product to be able to manage that centrally. And 59% stated that it would impact their decision to join or remain with a sportsbook. So it's one of those interesting factors that potentially is a differentiator, but it's going to need the operators to buy in together, or at least have a third party that is able to connect the dots and create that connective tissue. And Sue, I'm curious about how this plays into your strategy at Neosurf.
Yeah, I mean, it's unlikely that that's going to happen, right? The operator's going to start sharing data, but I like that actually. I might use that, Jay, that Neosurf can be part of the connective tissue because, the more operators that we have integrated via our API and have a payment using us as a payment method, the more information that we have. And that doesn't mean that I'm suddenly going to start sharing, player and consumer information between operators, but we have generic data. So, we can see what they're spending. So, and this kind of comes into the RG discussion as well. But in the UK, we're working with UTrust, right? We're looking at self-exclusion lists. So if a player has self-excluded, we can see that, right? We can send that operator that information to the operator via our KYC handshake. So there are a number of data points that we can share that start to make this a much more cohesive. It's not just about payments, right? We have some really interesting data that we can package up and share with those operators.
Yeah, it's excellent, and you can read that here from the player's lens. And again, at Betting Hero, we tend to look at things from the eyes of the consumer, and some of these quotes are pretty impactful. Having my verified ID automatically shared would save a lot of time and hassle. And again, this comes back to experience. How much time is it saving? How much hassle is it saving? And how important is that to the player?
Yeah, Jay, one thing to jump out here too, like so when we did the live sessions, which a couple scenarios that jumped out to me, one player he opened a separate bank account and he only uses that for sports betting. So he puts money in, and he knows when he then disperses across apps, withdraws, but that's he uses that to keep track of if he's up or down or how
So
much he's losing.
he's created his own central wallet
Created his
system.
own wallet. I mean, we saw a couple customers who have a notes in their notes app. They have the date, what they deposited. So like they're doing it because again, they're using multiple apps for different reasons, whether it's chasing better odds, chasing better promotions, you name it. But they have they have their own ways of keeping track of this today. So when we brought up this idea, they loved it because it would save them time. They don't have to go to their notes app. They don't have to take out a calculator and see what they did that past month. So
Yeah.
And
And this also starts to feed into the RG piece as well, the questions that we ask around how budgeting is really important.
Yep. Yeah, and that's exactly what I was going to bring up is we've got, we're now seeing evidence of players who are creating their own tools and products to be able to better manage their budgeting and from an RG standpoint. So great segue, and here's our third and final poll. So audience, appreciate you joining us here in answering these questions. So you'll see this pop up here. What percentage of individuals think that responsible gaming is important? Potentially a trick question, but let's see. Because I all think that we have a general idea. But it'll be interesting to see how players actually interact with the RG tools that are available and that have been designed and invested in to give them a better experience. So as these answers roll in, we'll cover off on them, and we've got a couple more slides to go, and then hopefully we'll have time for a couple of questions at the end. Perfect. So as expected, a large percentage of the respondents here, I think that more than 70% of the individuals surveyed think that RG is important. Let's take a look at the answers. Thanks, Alex. And you're right, 73% say responsible gaming is important. What's interesting, though, and Sue and Ernie, I want to get your input on this. Most are not utilizing the current RG limit tools. So why is that? And Sue,
yeah,
I'll come to you first, Sue. Actually, Ernie, I want to get your opinion after.
Sorry, Eddie. Yeah, I mean, I don't think this will be come a surprise to any of the RG or regulators that we have here today. But a lot of the players responded is that yes, it's really important to them, but they don't see the tools as meant for them because they don't have a problem. So, and Ernie can definitely speak to the tools that they do like, the time in app and the messaging. But I think in terms of actually going in and physically setting a limit, we didn't actually have that as one of the specific questions, but it just came up in discussion where we were in the in-person. They're not actually utilizing those tools because it's deemed as not for them. And the budgeting piece becomes much more important to them.
And this is opening up a whole new can. And if there's anybody in the audience that is in the RG space, perhaps this is an offline conversation, but is this a branding problem with RG? Is RG the right way to describe what we're trying to achieve here, which is obviously create a safer environment for players? Should it be called something different? Is that the problem, or does it go deeper than that?
I mean, that's a discussion that I know that a lot of our RG colleagues have had and are having. And the answer, yes, potentially. But I think also being able to, again, from my perspective, when I'm looking at this, and we talk on panels about this fairly regularly, is that payments are a fundamental part of this process, and we are the beginning of the transaction. The wager starts at the point that I decide that I'm going to place the bet, right? And that means I'm moving my money from wherever that might be, right? I'm making that transaction at that point. Therefore, I truly believe that the payments companies have a responsibility here. And what are the tools that we can provide? Because it's not just the operator's responsibility, right? We're all part of this ecosystem. We all need to step up So what is it that we can provide to help these players budget? Because to your point, they're writing notes on their apps, or they're creating their own self-limiting tools, but we're not making it easy for them.
Yeah, and they call them budgeting tools, right? They call them budgeting tools, the planning
Right,
tool. They're not RG tools in their mind, but
right.
they act very similarly, and you can see that in the quotes here. Responsible gaming is about not spending money that's for bills. I set limits of $100 and keep track of it mentally. This is a RG tool that this individual has created themselves. Responsible gaming is 10 out of 10 important. I can imagine that this individual probably didn't use self limits. I appreciate the reality checks that tell me how much time and money I've spent on the app. That's great. I do too when I'm on the apps and I realize that I've been sitting on there for 5 minutes trying to build a parlay or whatever it may be. It is really convenient that you get reminded of, hey, maybe go take a break. And I think that that's a good advancement that we've seen from the operators, and certainly more leaning in than others. However, what else can be done for us to be able to improve this, and how prevalent is the issue potentially? So let's move on to the next slide, and we'll wrap this up pretty quickly here. So 79% of the respondents expressed interest in a tool to track their total betting spend and set personal budgets. Again, we've spoken about the fact that many of these do actually exist today, but perhaps are branded or referred to differently than what a player might want them to be referred to as, or they're very difficult to find. Ernie, are there any other reasons that a respondent and players in general wouldn't go and seek the tools that are already available to them, whether inside the app or outside?
Yeah, I mean, this is one thing, and I see some questions coming in that maybe around this, but like there's certain states where on registration they bring up the RG tool, right? And it says, hey, would you like to set limits, weekly, monthly, certain amounts? And there's certain states like Ohio, right? Every operator is obligated to do that. There's some older states like Colorado, New Jersey, where that wasn't a feature when they signed up, right? So they never got exposed to that. They have to go into the profile, look for responsible gaming, which and Sue, I think you were kind of hitting on it, is they view this as someone who has a problem. They're like, I don't have a problem, like with that term, right? So that when we brought up responsible gaming to them, we brought up tools to track play, performance. That's what got them excited. Like, yeah, I want to be able to track how I'm doing, how much time I spent. So anything that was around your session today has been 2 hours long. You've spent $3,000 on the casino. Like anything that told them that, they really were in favor of, because then they can make their own decisions. But yeah, I think it's not the easiest to find. Certain states are easier than others, but even then, it's kind of an ancillary second thought. It's not it's not obligated. Not all operators are sending them an email in their first week of use. Hey, here's the RG tools you have available. So I think there is some opportunities around education there.
Yeah, I mean,
And of course, oh, sorry, Joe.
yeah,
Of course, the other element is that I'm only doing that on one app at a time, right? So there's nothing stopping me setting a limit and then going across to another app. And again, that's where we feel that we have a role to play. If we are that single point of deposit in, then we can provide tools that go across the multiple apps.
Yeah, I agree with you, Sue. I think that there's obviously a big part that the payments companies have to play here, given that they do have visibility into the players' behavior across potentially multiple products. How do we extract that? Difficult to say, but I think there's an opportunity there. I also think that there's an opportunity, and if you just look at some of these quotes here, I think there's an opportunity to make this a part of the experience. If we make RG a part of every customer's and every player's experience, it will become less about RG and more about the experience itself. What I'm hearing is that limits, time reminders, etc., these things are wanted. The players want to be receiving these notifications. Let's send them to them more often, right? Let's have a very regular time update or limit update, and let's remove the stigma of a problem. And certainly going away from problem gambling to responsible gambling is a good start, but I think that more can be done, because clearly the players are responsible enough to realize that there is a need for help here. And I think we as an industry have an opportunity and a responsibility, candidly, to be able to enforce this. So we're going to, there's one more slide if we can move that on to Alex, and then we have a couple of questions here. I know we're exactly at time, so if anybody does need to drop, no problem. We're going to run through a couple of the questions that came into the chat, and then I'll just remind you before everybody does depart that there will be a second webinar to this series turning insights into action. So, okay, we've understood these great pieces of information from the players themselves. What do we do with them? What does the industry actually do to get better? What can we do certainly around payments? Do we have a date for that yet, Sue? I'm not sure if we
No.
do. Communicate. Okay, it'll happen
Don't put me on the spot.
sometime in the near future. This event will
After
happen
after ice.
sometime after ice. We'll get the information out to everybody, so keep your eyes out for that. So let's go through a couple of these questions that came in, and apologies if I don't get through them all. But one question came in from Edward Corrigan. Do you see players' deposit and withdrawal behavior change when the public experiences favorable sports results, which has occurred this NFL season? So basically, are customers, are players depositing more when things go their way?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. So if they're winning, they're withdrawing and then they have more money to deposit back in. So yeah, we're seeing higher frequency. The more they win, the more frequency there.
Mm.
So it's almost like a double whammy for the operator, right? If things like that are happening where they're losing a bunch because of the favorites, they're also losing on the deposit and withdrawing end. So they're getting hit on both ends there.
Yeah. Okay. Great. And then moving on, Sue, I'll give this one to you. What exactly is a KYC handshake for anybody that doesn't know?
So it's one of the Neosurf products, and we actually call it the compliance handshake now. The KYC handshake is just a part of that, what I mentioned before, where we can actually share KYC data with the operators for pre-verified players, either Neosurf to the operator or vice versa. So, being both on deposit on the withdrawal side. The actual compliance handshake has various different reports, and we're talking about the data science and the reporting and being able to show whether I'm on an exclusion list, whether I've set limits across multiple operators, and other generic information with regards to volume, value, and velocity, where the players are loading the wallets. We can tailor that to each individual operator.
Great. Thank you. Extremely helpful. And then final question here from an anonymous attendee. So we can guess where this person came from potentially. Do you think operators say, in quotation marks, they are doing the right thing around RG, but are actually doing the bare minimum, therefore the message isn't getting through, and why the player doesn't feel like that perhaps the tools are meant for them? So are operators saying they're doing everything that they should be, and perhaps maybe not, and therefore players aren't understanding those messages?
So I'll go first on this one. I think we've seen some great improvements actually just recently. Both FanDuel and DraftKings have come out with dashboards, and giving more tools to the players so they can see, see that activity and essentially take more responsibility on that side. But I feel that they're just limited because it's only going to be that they're going to be restricted to within that one app. So, and again, I'll keep saying it. It's not just the operator's responsibility. We're all part of this ecosystem. We all need to step up and play our part.
Yeah, if I could piggyback on that, Sue, I agree with you. I think that actually we've seen. I don't think it's lip service from the operators. I think the operators do genuinely care. I think the challenging part is it's very difficult to understand exactly what information to share and with who, because, like you mentioned, we are looking at one piece of a very big pie potentially, and we're lacking a lot of information. So, is there a better way that we can share information across players to be able to prescribe them better tools, better resources, better messaging? But I do think that there is a large focus on the operators, and we're certainly seeing more and more of that. Now, I think the trick is going to be how do we understand the customer and what it is that they are looking for from an RG perspective, or however we want to name and phrase that moving forward. Because the customers are telling us, right? They want budgeting tools. They're using them. They want to set limits. We just got to speak their language and make it in a way that they feel comfortable with.
Yeah, and that's why I think that this research, the work you guys are doing, I mean, although it's only a very small piece, it's really important that we continue to go out and ask these questions and talk directly to the players, because otherwise we're in danger of making assumptions as to what they need rather than really listening to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, there's a great comment here just to close things off from one of the attendees. And I assume here that they're referencing the RG component. There's a stigmatization around problem gambling, and it's not necessarily that players don't want the tools that are available, but they don't want to be associated with having a problem, right? And therefore, they set spending limits as convenient tools to manage a gaming budget, when actually maybe they need these other resources so they don't become problem gamblers in the future. So excellent. We will wrap it up there. Sue and Ernie, thank you so much. This was always going to be fun and interesting and insightful. So I appreciate you both contributing so much. Thank you to the audience and the attendees for the great questions and participating in the polls. We will see you on the next one, and keep an eye out for the communication on that. And anybody that's going to be at ICE in Barcelona next week, I know Sue will be there. I will also be in attendance for a couple of days. So feel free to reach out to us if you want to continue any of these discussions in person.
Yeah, come say hi. We're Hall 5. I think we're 5E10, but yeah, the pink booth with the great coffee. So and obviously the woman with the pink hair. So come find me.
You can't miss Sue. She's always on brand. Pink hair, pink booth. I'll probably be there stealing some coffee. So Sue, I'll see you next week.
Great. Thanks, guys. It's been great. Appreciate it.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.